We have special news for you.
The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer.
Are you going to send me or anybody that I know to a camp?
We have people that are stupid. This week it's Robert E. Lee. I noticed that Stonewall Jackson's coming down. I wonder, is it George Washington next week? And is it Thomas Jefferson the week after?
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
It's the Ricochet Podcast with Peter Robinson and John Gabriel sitting in for Rob. I'm James Lalix, and today we have VDH and Ben Domenech. Let's have ourselves a podcast.
Bye-bye.
Welcome, everybody. It's the Ricochet Podcast, number 365, by the way. So if you want to go back in the archives and listen to one every single day, there's a year cut out for you, and what fun that'll be. How do we get here? Well, we're brought to you by fine people like Bombfell. Bombfell is the online personal styling service for men that helps you find the right clothes. You only pay for what you keep, and there's no charge to send returns back. $25 off your first purchase at bombfell.com/ricochet. And we're brought to you by the Great Courses. Ricochet podcast listeners get unlimited access to watch any of their video lectures free for an entire month. But you need to sign up using our special URL. That's thegreatcoursesplus.com/ricochet. And we're brought to you by Away Travel. Your luggage should not cost more than your plane ticket. And Away Travel's luggage is designed with the highest quality materials, and it's still under $300. For $20 off that price, visit awaytravel.com/ricochet20 and use the promo code Ricochet20 during your checkout. And we're brought to you, well, here's where we just sort of stop and think of the shade, the spirit of Rob Long, who at this point would come in with his genial chuckle and say, "Thank you, James. Yes, indeed." And he would try to guilt you, compel you, persuade you to taking the jaws of life to your wallet and opening it up. And like in the old cartoon sometimes when people who were wearing a barrel for clothing would open their wallet and flies would come out, we understand. If you feel a bit skint these days, well, good news. We've got a new podcast tier membership, $2.50 a month. John, tell people why they should do. I should say that Rob isn't here. So sitting in for him is John Gabriel, who also, in the spirit of Rob's absence, is not wearing socks with his shoes.
Of course not. Very casual here in Arizona. Yeah, you really should join Ricochet, folks. I know Rob is doing this, and I kind of want to play the ASPCA or Sarah McLachlan music in the background to guilt you into it, but it's fun. That's why you should join. It's fun. Yeah, you support all these 3,000 great podcasts, whatever we're up to now. But if you want to post, you can post. If not, you can just enjoy the community. It's really great, especially when you get behind the member feed. People getting each other jobs, people helping each other with family issues, tips, just coming together as a community. Kind of like if you are a geezer like myself, the old internet used to be when you would find some like-minded folks and just have fun. You don't have the trolls. You don't have the meanness, the ugliness. You can get into very lively debates, but it's just not this ugliness you find in any other comment section or social media feed or anything like that. So please give us a try. Just go to ricochet.com/join. Check out all the different tiers of membership we have. We'd love to meet you over there.
Right, and if you are one of those old geezers, don't go to alt.rec.ricochet on Usenet or something and look for us. No, we're modern on the internet with a wonderful, sparkling site with all kinds of fun stuff on it. Peter, welcome. Hello.
Hello.
Well, here we are at the end of another exhausting week. They're just exhausting. The news is exhausting. The reaction to the news is exhausting. The spinning. We start with North Korea. We go to Confederate memorials. We end perhaps with an attack in Barcelona. Stuff that used to seem to be spread out over the course of a fortnight or two now seems to be compacted in 72 hours. Barcelona. What can you say except point out that Wolf Blitzer, if I get this right, called the Barcelona attack a copycat of the Charlottesville attack.
Unbelievable.
Just extraordinary. And it reminds you that history begins this morning for some people, that everything that came before is irrelevant if some point can be made to advance a certain point. He can't possibly believe, can he, that the people in Spain were inspired by some fruit wad running his car and killing a woman in the United States of America.
We have one name, according to the New York Times now. There may be more names that they finally get around to releasing, but a spokeswoman for the Catalan police identified Musa Ukabir. Now, Musa Ukabir, something tells me, is not someone particularly interested in the American Confederacy. And I might also point out that Ukabir, to my knowledge, is not an old Spanish name. It is madness. Of course, it was another Islamist attack. And the idea that Wolf Blitzer suggests that it's a copycat, it really is a kind of insanity at this point. I had to drive around. I had some meetings up in San Francisco yesterday. I spent some time in the car and I listened to NPR. Why did I don't know why.
No, I do it all.
As if my blood pressure needed to be higher.
It's fascinating. I listen to a show called 1A, which is actually reasonable. Sometimes it's always smart, and it's necessary to listen to what's being said there. Go on.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think it is. I think it is actually necessary. In any event, they too made the point that this was that the Charlottesville was somehow one of a piece with the fellow who mowed down 100 people in Marseille and with these people running pedestrians down in Barcelona. Obviously, it is. Obviously, it is not. Anyone can. It's beyond the old George Orwell line. An idea so ridiculous only an intellectual could believe in it. Even they don't believe in it. They cannot believe in it. So what we have here is a country which is, at least a press, will come to the chief executive in a moment, but the press is simply out of its mind, really insane in the old. A strict sense of the word insane, unhealthy, ill. Something is wrong with the press.
But they're perfectly able to switch from assigning collective responsibility in one instance to turning over here and denying any sort of collective responsibility. And I'm not saying that there is in either case. I'm just saying that in the first instance of the attack in Charlottesville, the guy driving his car into the crowd is specifically related to a particular ideology that is shared by a huge number of people, even if they are not members of this tiny cell of losers. But then you look over here in Spain, and there's nothing to be learned from this at all.
By the way, I'm not sure that it's a huge number of people. That's one of the striking things to me about that the press has simply ignored, that the number of people who are marching in Charlottesville, as I have seen numbers, but they don't vary all that widely. The numbers run from a low of 200 to a high of 400.
But they will see, but
330 million. It's not vast numbers.
No, not at all. But what they will do is that
I'm sorry, you're saying what they'll suggest. Sorry, go ahead.
No, what they will suggest by finding somebody from the alternate viewpoint who is reasonable and rational to them, but strikes the rest of us as a little bit out there, they will find somebody who will say that the small, tiny sliver of morons and losers is actually indicative of the strain of thought in the right in general. That this is just a more enthusiastic efflorescence of the view.
As long as I'm venting about things that have enraged me. The other evening I was watching PBS, and there was a new documentary on the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. What gave them the right to replay this thing? By the way, I don't know whether this is on the whole PBS system, because I was watching. It was being used during a fundraising drive by one of the local PBS stations here. So I don't know whether it was across the whole system. But the hook was that they were comparing John Kennedy and Walter Cronkite, and cutting back and forth between events in Dallas and what Cronkite was learning in the newsroom at CBS. John Kennedy, Walter Cronkite, roughly the same age, both in their 40s at that stage, both had been in the Second World War, so on and so forth. Okay, but they trotted out the same old stuff, junk, that William Manchester put in his otherwise very fine book, Death of a President. And by what I mean by junk is William Manchester was the one who he wrote that book fairly quickly, as I recall, a year or two after it came out. In any event, he indicted not just Lee Harvey Oswald, but all of Dallas. John Kennedy was a martyr to right-wing America.
Climate
of hate. There is no evidence whatsoever, none, zero, nada, zip, zilch, that Lee Harvey Oswald in any way partook of any political atmosphere in Dallas. He had nothing to do with any right-wing organization in Dallas. What we know he had something to do with the Soviet Union and Cuban communists. He went to the Soviet Union and lived there for months. He went to Mexico City and visited the Cuban embassy. To the extent that Lee Harvey Oswald, a troubled lunatic, had any ideology at all, it was of the left, not of the right. And furthermore, what was it, a week or 10 days before he shot John Kennedy, we learned that he took a pot shot at General Walker, who was a leader in the John Birch Society. So Lee Harvey Oswald tried to kill a right-winger before. In any event, all this has been known for half a century. And there on PBS, the same old junk gets trotted out. It is lazy. It is irresponsible. Okay, if I may extend my rant by about another 90 seconds.
I may, but I just have to interject.
Go.
You sound a lot like a climate of hate denier. You're a climate of hate denier. Go on.
Now, again, when I was listening to PBS, I beg your pardon, this was NPR. Now I'm back in the car, getting enraged, blood pressure rising. Donald Trump made a number of assertions during the news conference on Tuesday that are factually interesting if you're a real journalist. He said there was violence on both sides. Was there? He said there were good people on both sides. Oh, that's interesting. Are there good people in the preserve the statue of Robert E. Lee are there good people on the preserve the statues side of the Confederate statues side of the argument? And, I've been looking around on the internet, and some people who want to preserve Confederate statues explicitly disavow any white supremacism, condemn slavery. This is quite interesting. He raised a number of points that interested sentient journalists would have investigated, and not a bit of it. NPR, with all its resources, a substantial portion of which come from us, the taxpayers, against our will. They benefit by using the tax system to fund themselves, and they couldn't get off their backsides to investigate and conduct any real journalism. The entire hour was just spent interviewing people who were condemning Donald Trump off the tops of their heads. No reporting, no real journalism. It was just appalling. All right, I'm out of breath.
Well, what we've had – oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask you, when he said that there are fine people on both sides, was he talking about the people who assembled the Unite the Right and the Antifa? That was the impression that I got.
Well, with Donald Trump, of course, who knows? But my point is, it was an interesting assertion.
Who knows? And that's exactly right.
Journalists could help us find out if they were doing their jobs.
Right, but it's not the journalist's job to figure out from the tangled mass of cold spaghetti that is coming out rhetorically from the administration sometimes what exactly he really means.
Well, he's not. You can do follow-up questions with the press office. What did he mean? They may actually ask the president. You could get interesting, or it could be that the press office had no good answer, and then you report that. It
is the time to rhetorically denounce both sides, and I have no problem with saying that the other side is violent too. Put them in the context of both groups share collectivist ideas of racial identity, which are antithetical to the American character and experience and what we want to be, and that requires a finer rhetorical skill and an intellectual grasp of what's going on than the man seems to have, and that's why we get into this situation, because he makes it so easy for the people who come preloaded with hate to get him again.
That's true. And by the way, I'm attacking NPR and PBS. I don't want to let Donald Trump off the hook here. On Tuesday, there are distinctions to be drawn between the alt-right and the Antifa, whoever they are. The United States has never gone to war with anybody on the Antifa movement. We went to war to defeat Nazis. We went to war. We had a civil war to settle the question of slavery, of white supremacy.
But we had a Cold War. We had a Cold War against the Antifa kind, because they are the. We absolutely do. When they're marching with hammers and sickles, when
they march with hammers and sickles,
when they've got the
hammers and sickles in Charlottesville.
I didn't see them there at the time. Maybe I didn't.
But there were swastikas and there were obvious references to the KKK and obvious references to the Nazis. For sure, that deserved a sharper condemnation from the President of the United States than anything he might say about the Antifa movement. For sure. We've been through wars to defeat those ideas and those forces. And if the Republican Party is anything, it is the party of Abraham Lincoln and the dignity of every human being, no matter what the race. And Trump muffed it, missed it completely. I don't want to let that man off the hook. He just blew it. And that we're spending a week talking about this when, as you pointed out, there are real things to worry about. North Korea among them is Donald Trump's fault.
And I have to bring John Gabriel in here for a second. And John, you've been silent because, of course, Peter and I have been talking over every attempt that you made. But I want to ask you, are you the kind of guy who likes to shop for clothes, John? Because I've reduced you now to a prop in a spot. I hope you realize that, but I'm just trying to bring you in here. Do you like to shop for clothes?
I loathe shopping. About a year ago, I was going to a place that needed resort casual, which I didn't know what it meant, because I'm not that educated, so I had to research it online, and then I stumbled around a mall, bumping into annoying teenagers. I loathe it. If only there was some kind of a web-based service that would take that pain away from me.
Well, that's the sort of thing that people say in order to set up an ad, not believing themselves that there actually wouldn't be such a thing. But you're right, John, if only there was, and I'm here to tell you that there is. It's called Bombfell. Bombfell, Bombfell, and it's simply an easier way for men to get better clothes. Resort, casual, work, whatever you want. You complete a simple questionnaire, tell them what you like, and then you're matched with a dedicated personal stylist. When you sign up, you pay nothing. Zero. You only pay for the clothes you keep. Period. Now, since Bombfell never charges you above retail price, you get a dedicated personal stylist, free shipping and returns, convenient home try-on, so you're not in some room that's, got pins on the floor and hangers and they're watching your ankles. No, it's just at home. You try it on, you look at it in preview, and you send it back if you don't like it. You also can look online to see every order before it ships, so you can say, no, that's not me. That's me. Now, Bombfell, it's fully personalized. Every piece has been handpicked for you by your own stylist, and they'll email you with selections, after which you'll have 48 hours to make any changes. Completely flexible. You can receive the clothes once a month, every 2 months, or every 3 months, whatever you want, and you can pause or cancel anytime. It is the most simple and straightforward service around. 4 steps, easy to begin this process. Sign up online at bombfell.com/ricochet. Answer a few simple questions about your measurements, of course, and your style preferences. 2, set up your order. Tell your stylist what you want. You need button-down shirts. Tell them you want 2 shirts. You need a pair of jeans. Tell them that as well. And I'm wearing, by the way, some Bombfell-provided jeans. Most comfortable I've ever had. Fit perfectly when I put them on. 3, get a preview email from your stylist with individual picks. You'll have 48 hours, as I said, to make the changes and even cancel if you don't want any of them. And 4, you get your clothing. Then you have 7 days to try it on, which suggests you're moving really slowly. You pay only for what you keep. Your card isn't charged until you decide what you're going to keep, and the shipping both ways is free. So like I say, I'm wearing some Bombfell supplied jeans, and when I put them on instantly, they were just the best jeans I'd ever had. I don't know. I'd never heard of the brand before. Now that's the brand that I buy. That's the Bombfell experience. All right, we've negotiated a special deal on behalf of you, the Ricochet podcast listener. Right now, Bombfell is offering $25 off your first order when you go to bombfell.com/ricochet and sign up. That's spelled BOMBFELL.com/ricochet for $25 off your first purchase. One more time, bombfell.com/ricochet. And we thank Bombfell for sponsoring this, the Ricochet podcast. And now, John, are you there?
I am here.
Great. Who would you like? See, I'm doing my best here. Who would you like to talk to?
I would love to talk to Victor Davis Hanson.
Who wouldn't? Because VDH, he's the Martin and Ely Anderson Senior Fellow in Residence in Classics and Military History at the Hoover Institution, Stanford, Professor of Classics Emeritus at California State University, Fresno, a nationally syndicated columnist for Tribune Media Services. He does the Classicist podcast right here in Ricochet. Who wouldn't want to listen to VDH? If only there was a way to bring him onto this show. I'm just thinking. Oh, well, as long as we're going to continue that hoary trope for the rest of the show, there is, and here he is. Welcome, Victor. We had an interesting situation this week with North Korea, and at the end of the week, we had Steve Bannon telling a Politico reporter that essentially, for all the fire and fury talk, there's nothing we can do. Is he right? And is this something really that they ought to be saying?
No, I don't think he's right. We have been doing things. I think it's the first time that a North Korean Kim of the 3 generations has actually stopped or backed off. He didn't back down. He backed off, at least for a while, in his threats to attack Guam, and that was because of the good cop, bad cop of Trump and Mattis threatening military action, and then Tillerson and McMaster saying there was a diplomatic out. So when Bannon said that, I think it was unfortunate because it undermined what the administration is doing. And of all the things he said in that interview to Robert Kuttner, that's the one that's going to get him in trouble, I think, because it affects national security. He shouldn't have said, I don't know why he called up that reporter, which he had done earlier. It wasn't a very bright thing to do, but he's a bright guy. Maybe he knows something that you and I don't, but it didn't seem to be very valuable unless he wants to be fired. I don't know why.
Victor, that's a firing offense, isn't it? Peter here.
Yeah, I think it is. I don't think you want the special advisor to the president. I mean, I think it is in the term of classical definitions. It doesn't. I don't mean that I think he should be fired or Trump should fire him. I'm just thinking that this was an administration along past lines. It may or may not be. I'm hedging because I'm trying to imagine what would have happened if Ben Rhodes said that the Iran deal was a bad idea, or would Obama have fired him? Probably not. I don't know. But I don't want to make a sweeping statement like that. But it did undercut their credibility.
Well, and what's interesting, too, this is John Gabriel, Victor. What's interesting is we have seen a lot of movement on North Korea. We actually had Kim back down from his lunatic threats to threats on Guam because we have pressured China, and a lot of that is tough talk. That is diplomacy. It's not just all sweetness and light. Diplomacy is saying, look, if you don't change your behavior, there are going to be serious repercussions, not only to North Korea, but to China and trade and all sorts of other things. So it seems like it actually has worked.
Yeah, I think that's been actually the most significant thing that Trump team has done after some 30 years. They were the first administration to actually see results. They got really tough sanctions through the UN. They're probably going to get more. They had some effect on China. Trump did what other presidents like Clinton and even Obama, but Harry Truman, he sort of, not so much as Richard Nixon, though, playing the mad bomber along with the good cop Henry Kissinger, but presidents have done that in the past and it's been effective. Peter knows better than I do that Reagan called, I think, Gaddafi the madman of the Middle East, or flaky, and, that open mic, we start bombing the Soviet Union. I think the Soviets put an entire army on alert when they heard that. So whether it was inadvertent or an accident. So presidents do stuff like that. Trump has been pretty good at it, and it seems to work. So it's just mysterious why somebody who says he's a Jacksonian on foreign policy would undercut the president. And I just don't believe he thought it was off the record. He's
Victor,
a very clever guy.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Victor, Peter here once again. This is the question we have to ask. The president's remarks in the wake of Charlottesville are still what he gave this press conference on Tuesday. Here we are Friday. It's still dominating the news. And now Mitt Romney has a statement up on Facebook in which he's calling on the president to apologize. It's a long statement, five good-sized paragraphs here. Let me quote one sentence. Whether he intended to or not, what President Trump communicated caused racists to rejoice, minorities to weep, and the vast heart of America to mourn. Close quote. Should Donald Trump apologize?
Well, I think he should, believe it or not, issue a fourth statement. And the second one was pretty good. In other words, he has to understand that the whole controversy, everything he said in his press conference was in theory correct. There were probably a few people who just wanted to protest the monuments. But the alt-right, racist, Confederate, Nazi, those crazy people had hijacked that movement. And so even though they had a legal right to express their views, and even though the Antifa counter-protesters were in some ways as extreme, there wouldn't have been any news unless those white racists had prompted. So what Trump needed to do was saying this entire thing, whatever the details are, was promulgated and started by these group of people whose views I abhor. And he did that in the second one. But then in the press conference, he went off, as he always does, on these cul-de-sacs about the statues. So I think he should just clarify it and say, I want to put this to an end, and I think that the culpability lies with these dangerous, or not, they're not so dangerous, they're crazy and they're vile, the Nazis and the neo-Confederates. So I think he could do that.
Right. She should do that. So we've got, again, I'm just clicking around here looking at the news of the morning, and Gingrich says we've reached an inflection point and Trump is more isolated than he realizes. Victor, you have your position, correct me if I'm wrong, but your position all along has been reluctant support for Trump. You've never hesitated to point out how reluctant your support is, but between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, your view was it was about a 49-51 decision, so forth. Do you feel he gives a speech to a joint session of Congress, which is wonderful, then he tweets the next morning and distracts attention. He gives a speech in Saudi Arabia, which is a pretty strong statement against terrorism. He's got all the Arab leaders. It's a remarkable event. And then he tweets and off he goes on another controversy. Speech in Poland, powerful speech in Poland, their controversy. Anyway, you get the point. Are you beginning to feel that the George Will, Bill Kristol argument, Max Boot argument that the guy is just unsound in and of himself, whatever the issues may be, he is unfit for the office?
Well, I don't really think that everybody thinks you can't tell Trump anything, but I don't think that he is forming U.S. foreign policy. I think it's Pompeo, Mattis, McMaster, Tillerson, and I don't think that he's doing much with economic policy. So I ask myself the same question you ask me every day. I say to myself, right now, would you like a sober and judicious Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama dealing with immigration policy in mellifluous tones, warning us how great the Iran deal is, that we have to have six-party talks and more foreign aid for North Korea, that there needs to be more regulation, we've got to keep banning fracking on federal lands, we've got to close down coal, that the sanctuary cities are a good thing. And I'm not convinced that's true. I think the country is much better off than it was 6 months ago. But I understand that Trump is erratic, and he's suicidal in the sense that, I don't mean that literally, but he says things that hurt his thing. He's got a pretty good anti-terrorism policy, but when he tweets something that's factually incorrect about John Pershing, that was a rumor. Part of it may be true that he buried Muslim extremist terrorists in the Philippines in pig skins, or he put pig blood on bullets. That was a sort of a common rumor, but we don't know whether it's true or not. And Pershing himself had a carrot and stick approach, so he says things that are factually, at best, dubious. So all that bothers me, of course it does. But I will say one thing. We're in new territory. We've never had a president who popular icons said they wanted to blow up, or they wanted to ritually decapitate him, or plays said they wanted to stab him, or they've gone after his wife as an illegal alien, or his daughter as a shyster or entrepreneur making profits out of the White House. We've never had a media like CNN before, in which, if you just look at it a second, they had to fire 3 of their top journalists for making up news. We've had one guy, Fareed Zakaria, who's a serial plagiarist. We've had another person who was fired from his show. We've had another host who held up a decapitated facsimile of Trump's head. We've got this Jim Avila who's completely unhinged. So, yes, I think I'm not sure though. I think he's got to stop tweeting. Kelly's got to be more assertive. But we're in new territory. I don't think we've ever had a media like this in my lifetime. And it's not just something that I'm saying to quote. Everybody does it, because the Shorenstein Center showed that in the case of CNN, I think 93% of their coverage was negative. We've never been there before. Never have. And so we're in a virtual civil war of the media against Trump. And it really redefines, I think, people's views of those who work for him. They said, well, how can they work for Trump? And I sleep better at night that there are these wonderful people like Sessions and Pruitt and the foreign policy team that are working for him. And they're doing a great job. They're under enormous pressure, though. Right. And so I think that's where I am. We could grant, I think, that represents a special kind of heroism. Jim Mattis, John Kelly, H.R. McMaster. I've met him, but these people. And
they're not particularly political people. They're just trying to hold the country together. They're just serving.
Not just trying to hold the country together. They're trying to do two things. They're trying to use Trump's conservative instincts, which were apparent when he appointed Gorsuch and people like themselves, to restore deterrence. And they're trying to undo the damage that Obama did with the Iran deal, the appeasement of North Korea, the red lines, step over lines, deadlines that were empty, the Libyan disaster, the disastrous reset, the Spratly Islands aggression, China. I mean, we were in really dangerous. We had a very charismatic and mellifluous president that almost got us into a war. And they're trying to stop that and restore deterrence when they have a very unsteady person they work for. So I have a great deal of admiration for them. But before we write off Trump, there's something there. And that there is, I don't think that Mitt Romney, who was probably right today asking Trump to clarify, apologize, would have ever got us out of the disastrous Paris Accord had he been elected. I'm sure that he would have appointed Jim Mattis as Defense Secretary. I don't think he would have made the appointments that you see in education or EPA. I know he wouldn't have done all those deregulations, and I know he wouldn't have gone to West Virginia and revived the coal industry. And I know that he wouldn't have won those blue states, the so-called blue wall. There's no way in the world he would have. So
that's all true, and I grant that,
so
and they're good things.
They've got to be very careful because Trump is not a catalyst for this movement. He's a reflection that the Republican Party, and yes, the intellectual elite that are so vehemently anti-Trump, and that includes Bill Kristol or George Will or whoever we want to cite, they had forgotten that their idea of absolutely free trade without worry whether it was fair or not, and their coastal viewpoint of globalization and their sort of open borders helps commerce and cheap labor, and they're sort of I want to get along with the politically correct left, and I'll make concessions. That had alienated a lot of people, and it came off as elitist and condescending. And they're like the Bourbons; they have learned nothing and forgotten nothing. And so, until they can come up with an alternate view or a view of somebody, if they think that Trump's going to go out of office and then Mike Pence is going to call up the Weekly Standard and the National Review and say, "Look, he's gone. Let's go back to Jeb Bush republicanism, and we can win again," they're going to lose. Just a fact.
Well, speaking of bourbon, apparently I'm not supposed to drink Belite bourbon anymore because the CEO of the company is not friendly toward LGBTQ, Two-Spirit, etc. rights. During some family dispute, this came up, and now people are being encouraged not to drink this bourbon. And that's a sort of unending, grinding culture war that makes a lot of people reluctantly vote for Trump or the right because they just see a pointless, endless assault on the private sphere, the insertion of politics into everything. But that said, we know that no matter who the Republican president had been, if it had been Mitt Romney or if it had been Marco Rubio, that he would be held up by some as a embodiment of white supremacy and the corporatist, elitist, oligarchical interests, etc. But with Trump, it makes it very, very easy, doesn't it, for them to find in him all of the things that they would naturally find in others. And it makes it seem more, their case, which is ridiculous, seem more reasonable. Which is why many of us lament why. Well, we know
they
where I'm
do.
going. So
I tend to concur with that. I wish he would not tweet. I wish Kelly would, but I share your views on that. But there's something that I don't know, and I don't think you know, and I don't think anybody knows, and that is to the extent that Trump is sort of like the burner on your stove, and he turns it on high, and he puts something in it, and weird things happen. And the weird things that happen are the left, that scab of the left is torn off, and now we see people come out of the woodwork, like Al Sharpton, the homophobe, racist, anti-Semite, demanding that we get rid of the Jefferson Memorial, or people now calling for the defacement of Mount Rushmore. And Trump was right about that. Are we going to rename Washington and Lee University? Maybe so. We could get rid of, we should boycott Joan Baez's albums because she restarted her career with the bands the night they drove Old Dixie down. I mean, these are logical assumptions that follow from the anti-Trump position on Charlottesville.
Oh, here's a weird, bizarre thing. John Gabriel gets to ask a question before.
Yeah.
Hi, Victor.
But, I mean,
As you're a historian, one thing that I've noticed with this Antifa versus alt-right, I guess you could call them very nebulously, whatever that term means today.
Yeah.
It's almost like you have in Italy, the black shirts versus the reds. And I think the vast majority of Americans, polling has shown this, are a lot more hesitant than the media to pull down every statue we have going in the South or elsewhere to Robert E. Lee and so forth. What are your thoughts about the statues? What purpose do they serve? We've seen a lot of intellectuals based in northern states, no doubt, saying, oh, we need to tear them all down immediately, when that's not the federal government's role. What purpose do they serve these days?
Well, I'm someone who wrote a biography of Sherman and toured the South, and actually it was Sherman's March to the Sea. So I've dealt with the people who believe it was a war of northern aggression. I've got a lot of hate mail from it. But I think there's an answer to it, and that is that when you look at the past and you want to rewrite it, it's very dangerous to do that, and you have to calibrate things very carefully. Everybody can agree you don't build a monument or reference Sepp Dietrich, the Nazi general, or Joachim Peiper, the psychopath. But Erwin Rommel was a professional soldier that was involved in the plot to kill Hitler. What do you do about him? And what I mean by that is, by all means, I don't think that when I go to Memphis, Tennessee, that there should be a public statue of Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was the founder of the Ku Klux Klan, a multimillionaire slave trader before the war, and committed war crimes at Fort Pillow. Okay, I get that. But James Longstreet was very different. He was a reluctant Confederate. After the war, he armed African Americans to fight for Reconstruction. He apologized. He joined the Republican Party. So what I'm getting at is you calibrate the past. Maybe you don't want a public statue of Roger B. Taney, the author of Dred Scott, or Nathan B. Forrest, but that's not the same thing as saying you want to take down Lee's statue. But progressives better be careful where this war starts, because progressivism, the large movement that energizes the Democratic Party now, was based on a pseudoscientific idea. That's where it grew up, of racial superiority, genetics, euthanasia, forced sterilization. So you pick a progressive hero today, and I can match quote for quote with Robert E. Lee. Susan B. Anthony, she said she would never shake the hand of a black man. Margaret Sanger, no need to go there, but we understand that she wanted to push abortion to get rid of the non-white population. Woodrow Wilson said he wouldn't integrate the troops and there would be no black people in the civil service under his presidency. And I could go on, but my point is that they were a much more insidious, dangerous racism than the parochial tribalism of maybe Lee or Stonewall Jackson, because they had the power of the intellectual elite behind them, in the North especially, and they had this pseudo-scientific veneer that was appealing to who? Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, Francisco Franco. They all quoted chapter and verse progressives whom they really adored, and yet we haven't seen that. So what's Planned Parenthood going to do when this thing gets going? Because they have culpability.
Phrenology, the science was settled. Victor, thank you very much for coming with us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hey, Victor.
Thanks so much.
One last note here. We'll get a chance to talk about this at length later, but I just got a copy of the galleys of your new book, The Second World Wars. You've written a lot of great books. This may be your masterpiece. Everybody make a note. I don't even know if it's available for pre-order yet on Amazon, but The Second World Wars, plural, Victor's newest book. Brilliant, Victor.
Well, thank you.
Hey, Victor, take the rest of the week off.
I need it. I don't want to wade into this whole statue thing. It's getting something,
Yeah.
It's a lose-lose situation. But Trump is, I don't know.
Well, when you talk about the war of when you talk about the war of northern aggression being up here in the north, that's sort of funny to me. And I think, well, if it was Minnesotans nowadays, it'd be the war of northern passive aggression behavior.
Well,
there'd be a
I
statue
gave a
of some.
talk at Louisiana State University about why Sherman was smart to burn a swath through Georgia, and believe me, I almost did not get out alive.
You went to Louisiana to give that lecture? Oh, Victor.
Yeah. I needed money. I was in my late 30s, and I had 3 children that needed braces, so they paid me $500. So.
Well, we'll turn that into academic for hire rewrite speech for personal gain, and that's how that anecdote will pop out. Thank you, Victor. We'll talk to you later.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, so Victor's got a book in the Second World War. That sounds incredible, and I can't wait to read it. Wouldn't you want to just sit down in any of his classes and listen to what he has to say? Because sitting in a class is a wonderful experience that we all had in our 20s. Well, not all of us, of course. Some of us went out there, worked, and did actual important things, but some of us sat in rooms, dusty or otherwise, and listened to people intone about books or about history. And maybe sometimes you miss those days, and if you do, that's where the Great Courses comes in. You can learn from professors of VDH quality caliber level simply by going to thegreatcourses.com and signing up. Now, thegreatcoursesplus.com, well, there's subjects, the breadth that you can possibly imagine, history and politics, photography and cooking. And now you can watch the Great Courses Plus anytime from anywhere on your smartphone, your tablet, your laptop, your television, or you can download them to watch offline, which is great for traveling. Now, this featured course is Influence, mastering life's most powerful skill. And wouldn't you like to be more influential, particularly when it comes to having arguments with people with whom you disagree? You would. In this course, you'll gain valuable knowledge that you can apply to your career or your home life. It explains the psychology behind how and why people can be influenced. Wouldn't it be great to learn these things and talk to Scott Adams and influence him in ways that he didn't expect? It's possible. The dark side of influence is also taught in this course by Professor Kenneth G. Brown. In this lecture, you'll learn how some people use the tools of influence to cheat people. Delve into what researchers call the dark triad of personality characteristics that lead influential people to exploit others. Machiavellianism, narcissism, psychopathy. Not only will you understand their motivations, you'll be able to recognize them before they exploit you. So it's not just some airy-fairy academic nonsense living up there in the clouds. This is stuff you can apply to your real life days. We want you to check out the Great Courses Plus today, and you're going to love it. They're offering the listener, an unlimited access to watch any video lecture free for an entire month, but you need to sign up using the special URL. And that's someone'smakingespressointhebackground.com. Is somebody making espresso in the background? Sounds like that to me.
Not in my background.
Believe it or not, I am not making espresso at this moment.
I'd heard the telltale hiss of somebody making a fight. And that's the thing. Cooking. Did I mention that there are cooking courses here? So if you want to learn how to make great coffee, the Great Courses can help you. But only if you go to thegreatcoursesplus.com/ricochet. Free month. Start it now. thegreatcoursesplus.com/ricochet. That's thegreatcoursesplus.com/ricochet. And, of course, our thanks to the Great Courses for sponsoring this, the Ricochet Podcast. Now we're going to talk to Ben Domenech. He's the publisher of the Federalist, host of the Federalist Radio Hour, and he writes The Transom, an indispensable daily subscription newsletter for political insiders. And he can be seen regularly on CBS's Face the Nation. Hey, Ben, you had a great piece this week, which was saying that most people seem to support leaving the monuments there for various reasons, to preserve history, because they agree with them, or because they don't. In an age of literal iconoclasm now, which we have, we seem to have a body of public officials who want to get ahead and outside of what people actually believe and do what they think is the right thing. This isn't how we do things in a republic, is it?
It really isn't. I mean, the thing that really has bothered me about this whole process is, it's important for us to remain a nation that is governed by the people, by ourselves. And so in all these localities, the people who live where these things are, they need to go through the process of making a determination, whether that's something that happens through a city council, whether it happens through legislation, whether it happens through a plebiscite or what have you. And I think instead we have this nationalized, crushing narrative on this front that eliminates any ability to have the kind of representative self-government that we have in so many other respects in this area. What happened in Baltimore in the dead of night, by an act of fiat by the mayor and by the authorities there, is the exact opposite of what we should want here. We should be able to work through this process. And James, the other aspect of this to me is I would actually be in favor of people advocating for more monuments, not fewer, in the sense that we should be having history in front of us, as a group, and whether that includes, statues that are erected to figures who we believe deserve more respect from the Civil War era, whether it's Union soldiers, whether it's escaped slaves, what have you. I would much rather see that going on in this current conversation than engaging in the kind of iconoclasm that we've seen in the past couple of days.
And I agree with you completely. My only caveat would be, in this day and age, the statues that would be raised to those people would be unintelligible masses of aluminum. Like Frank Gehry's Eisenhower monument. If they could actually find
absolutely terrible.
If they could find somebody who could actually carve a Frederick Douglass, that would be fantastic.
Yes,
John.
Yes, exactly.
Well, this is John Gabriel. Ben, thanks so much for being on. Mm-hmm. And something I'm seeing from the hinterland way out here in the western states. Arizona was not a state till 50 years after the Civil War. You have a lot of writers ensconced in those old Yankee states. And just demanding that all the statues around the country be removed. I agree completely. How about putting up more? I think we need more Frederick Douglass statues. They should be in every state, essentially.
Here.
That's my personal take on it. But basically, where does this end? James mentioned iconoclasm, and that's exactly what it's like, or the madness of the French Revolution desecrating churches and the like. Where do progressives think this would end? Because so many of their heroes, many of these statues, all this kind of neo-Confederate revival that happened in the 1920s, were Democratic governors saying, hey, we need to incorporate the Confederate flag in our current flag, and trying to kind of lionize the rebellion against the North. That doesn't seem to get mentioned a whole lot.
It certainly doesn't. And I mean, just contextually, I think people don't necessarily understand the context from which, Birth of a Nation and things like that came, in the historic record as something that, was a real surge, particularly under Woodrow Wilson. And it's one of these things that I think people, again, should understand. When it comes to a lot of these statues as well, you saw, kind of an uptick around the turn of the century in statue making. And that was something that I think was primarily done, frankly, as a representative of the fact that generation was dying off, and that there were a lot of people who, had fought under these various figures, had participated in significant battles, and that people wanted to honor them and to put them as examples for the community. I think that the thing that we need to keep in mind, though, is that this accepts a more complicated view of history than what I think today's progressives really want to allow. They instead, are dealing with renaming all these different things on campuses and taking down all of these different professors who are engaged in wrongthink. And this is not an era that's really going to tolerate the idea that someone can be honored as being heroic but wrong. Someone who, the founders could be great and honorable men while also, engaging in practices that will ultimately be deemed wrong by history.
Ben, your piece was mostly about process. We want to be ruled by ourselves. Statues and communities need to be discussed by communities. Get that point completely. You're touching on something else now. What do we make of, the late historian of the Civil War, Shelby Foote, brilliant 3-volume history of the war. And then, of course, he was one of the central figures in Ken Burns' documentary, The Civil War. He was a Southerner himself, of course. And Shelby Foote used to talk about the settlement. And the settlement was, in fact, there are excerpts of his writing, and you can find this on YouTube. And anybody who wants to hear Shelby Foote's opinion probably ought to go to Shelby Foote. I may misstate it slightly, but the settlement was as follows: that the South fought for a bad cause, but some figures in the South, maybe even many figures in the South, did so, just as you suggested, with a certain heroism. That military figures such as Lee were military professionals, and there was something honorable in that, and that figures, again, such as Lee, fought out of a sense of community, love of native land. And again, there was something honorable in that. And this is a paraphrase of Foote, but the North got its victory, and the South was permitted to live with a certain sense of honor. Do we think that makes sense in the 21st century? Is that a coherent point of view, or was it whitewashed from the beginning? What do you think?
Well, I think that you've done a good job of stating Foote's point, and I would encourage everyone to look to his writing and to look up the excerpt that you're talking about. I worry that we may have reached a point where this is no longer possible in the country. I mean, I think one of the things that was a major factor into that played into this at the time was that the South showed people how to lose, in the sense that that Lee did not engage in a guerrilla resistance movement that could have, taken the conflict and played out in a way. He was not Nathan Bedford Forrest. He did not go down the line of saying, of resistance to this. Instead, he conceded defeat. And I think that was something that, ultimately at the end of the day, people could view that as a possibility of our ability as a country to live together, to move forward together beyond this brutal conflict that we had over one of the worst things that humans have ever done to each other. And that's something that I think is very important and valuable, and allows us to, view each other as neighbors, even if we disagree about fundamental truths about human decency and the way that we ought to treat each other. I worry that we have now entered an era, though, where, because of this incredible push toward virtue signaling in every single area of human life, that such a complex perspective may not be tolerated anymore within our society. Certainly that is what the baying mobs that want to take all these things down desire. The sad part about that is that we don't just lose something when it comes to our knowledge of history. We lose something that I think has been a critical aspect of American neighborhood, and the ability to view each other, whether we are of very different political views or tribes or backgrounds, as fellow citizens and Americans, as fully the same as the person on the opposite side. And that's something that I think goes away when you have these types of forces baying for iconoclasm.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say the complexity and perspective. Complexity and perspective and the rest of these things are just code words to maintain white supremacy. As some will say, that what count. I mean, we really are looking at this sort of French Revolutionary era idea of scouring history and starting from zero, which is always the progressive leftist desire. Mm-hmm. Going back to Marx, to extirpate private property, to reset all of the social relationships. I mean, they really want to turn the Etch-a-Sketch of America upside down and give it a good shake. And while that's not the Democratic Party in toto, that's the forces that's dragging them in the direction that they willingly or not are going to be pulled, right?
You touched on something interesting there, which is that, if you look back historically, one could argue for a significant portion of America's history in the 20th century that we actually had three parties in the country. That there was a Republican Party, there was a Democratic Party, and then there was a Southern Democratic Party. One that inherited a lot of the heritage of this, and certainly was, as you said earlier, more defensive when it came to Southern history and toward these various figures. What we've had since then, of course, is a great cultural sort that has pushed all of these conservatives, people who had traditional values in a lot of different senses, out of the Democratic Party and into the Republican Party. So you have a much more clarified partisan divide. And then I think this has the sad effect of putting this into a position where it is viewed, at least by the media and by many political figures, as being a monopartisan affair, and that it's, okay, these are statutes that Republicans alone will defend, or something like that. And that's, I think, that's another part that's sort of playing into the negative effect here, and it's why we're headed in such a wrong direction as it relates to the founders. If we view the American founders as being only of one party or tradition, then what we're doing isn't just going to lead to taking down statues, renaming things. It's going to lead to taking down the things that they built that has been fundamental to America, namely the Constitution and our founding documents. And that's where this ends up. And it's something that I think is that people should understand that there are not going to be lines drawn between Confederates and Thomas Jefferson. The same things that you're seeing in the press today from a number of different figures, Al Sharpton most recently saying the Jefferson Memorial should not be funded anymore. That kind of talk is only going to accelerate as this moves forward. And I think that people who believe in America's traditions and believe that those aspects of the founding generation that have been such a benefit to us are going to have to stand up and defend them in ways that they may never have had to before historically, just considering the conversation that we have today about race in America.
And Ben, this is John again. You spend a lot of time in the Beltway. We're all scattered about the country and looking at what's going on in the Beltway and this Trump obsession, whether for him or against him, especially the media. People just seem to be losing their mind over everything that's going on from within the Beltway. What is your POV and just the Beltway in general on Trump now? If you watch the news, if I'll spend 3 hours watching the news and then I talk to my neighbors, not a soul is talking about Trump. And I'm just wondering where the D.C. point of view is right now regarding him.
The D.C. point of view on him is that he's an utter disaster. And that they're also obsessed with him, obsessed with every aspect of this White House, obsessed with everything that they see going on within it, constant palace intrigue and things like that. And frankly, I think that the Beltway blames Trump for all the problems that they're having, which is a perspective that I don't hear when I get out into the country. Right. I actually, do that as much as possible. And the perspective I typically hear when I get out is one that is more. That places a lot more blame on the Congress than on the president. They feel like these political figures who are very familiar with, have been promising them things for a long time, and I think that they're correct in assessing that Donald Trump would really sign any legislation that the Congress sent him that did anything approaching what he's said are his aims, and that I think is something that. Is a much more balanced perspective on this White House. I will say that there is kind of an inconsistency within the Beltway that people remark on a lot, which is that if you actually look at what agencies are doing, what the people who are in charge of these various entities are doing, it actually is a lot more close to normalcy than you might expect. That you have, a process that people go through where they make decisions and things like that. And so it's a situation where the president is kind of the anomaly. He's the thing that's different and that behaves differently than any politician to occupy that office ever has before. And that just gets people in Washington on edge, and, blood pressures are up and people are stressed out. And I think that's not going to change anytime soon. I think you're going to continue to see that to be the case, even as the frustrations across the country seem to be more, why are all these other politicians not able to get anything done when they're the professionals who've been around forever?
Well, you can get professional opinion at the Federalist, and you can subscribe to the Transom. And Ben, thanks so much for showing up today, and we hope to have you on soon.
Always a pleasure.
Great talking with you.
One of the interesting things about the statues, I saw this. One of the statues that was pulled down was not a solid mass of metal or stone. Yes. It was a very thin and twisted little thing. And the reason for that is because apparently a lot of these statues were made cheaply by a northern company, I believe, that went around and sold them to southern towns and said, put up a plinth and we'll give you your basic generic Confederate guy standing at rest, looking mournfully into the distance with a contemplative look and the lost cause, etc. And so these things actually are pretty cheap. They're not that substantial. And you can imagine the guys going around town to town. There's salesmen, no doubt, who went town to town to sell people these statues. And it probably came after the carpetbag era. But still, you know what the carpetbaggers were, guys, don't you? What they're named for?
I'm assuming it's carpet bags that they actually carried with them, right?
Right. They gathered up their stuff in a carpet and made haste to the south to exploit and to make deals and the rest of it. So the cheapness of their luggage was a sign of their...
Hey, wait a minute. The reason I know about carpet bags is that my grandmother had an old one. So watch this about the cheap... Well, actually, it probably was pretty cheap, come to think of it. Anyway.
I personally would hate to travel with a bag made out of a carpet.
That was almost Kudlow-esque in its cluelessness. I just want to say.
Go.
And John was onto something there. John channeling this.
Yeah, I personally would loathe to try to just tackle modern air travel with a bag made out of a carpet.
It's preposterous.
Some solution.
It's ridiculous. If only there was a better way. And of course there is. And that better way is away travel. They were started with one specific reason: to create the perfect luggage. The approach is simple. Create special objects that are designed to be resilient, resourceful, and essential to the way you travel today. Away uses high-quality materials while offering a much lower price compared to other brands by cutting out that dreaded, hated middleman and selling directly to you. Choose from 9 colors and 4 sizes: the carry-on, the bigger carry-on, the medium, or the large for extended stays. Now, here are the design features. All suitcases made with premium, lightweight German polycarbonate. Each piece has 4 360-degree spinner wheels. They're quite nimble, trust me. And the carry-on sizes, they're compliant with all major U.S. airlines. TSA-approved combination lock built right into the top of the bag so no one's going to rifle through your stuff. Removable, washable laundry bag that keeps your stuff separate from the clean. Both sizes of the carry-on are able, I love this, to charge your cell phone, tablets, e-readers, and anything else powered by a USB cord. No more skulking around the airport looking for a free outlet. Now, just plug it right into your suitcase and people will look at you and say, why, that person is stunningly modern. A lifetime warranty. If anything breaks anything, they'll fix it, replace it for life. 100-day live trial. If at any point you decide it's not for you, you return it for a full free refund, and there's no questions asked. Free shipping, of course, on any away order within the lower 48. Now, let me tell you, I got one of these things to try out, and I loved it. It had the little USB battery in it, and I would sit in the airport and charge. But I loved it so much that I went and bought another one. I bought the big one, and I love it too. It is a gorgeous piece of work. And every one of the details, from the luggage tag to the insides to the wheels to the handle, it's sturdy, it's strong, but it's lightweight and it's stylish. I just love it when it comes thumping down the conveyor belt. Yep, that one's mine. Special offer to you if you want to have that same pride in your luggage. $20 off a suitcase. Visit awaytravel.com/ricochet20. That's awaytravel.com/ricochet20. And use the promo code Ricochet20 during your checkout. One more time, that's awaytravel.com/Ricochet20. Use promo code Ricochet20 for checkout for $20 off any suitcase. And we thank Away for sponsoring this, the Ricochet podcast. Well, what's coming down the wires today now is that Bannon supposedly is going to be out by the end of the afternoon, which would make this podcast a bit moot were we to talk about it. However, I'm going to make a request of Yeti here. Blue Yeti, our invaluable producer. I'm going to say 2 things. Use one of them. 1. So the news is that Bannon is out, and this isn't surprising to anybody. There have been a lot of accusations that Bannon was one of the White House's worst leakers, and since he called up a left-leaning political reporter and talked to him about his fights with the people of the administration, he's gathered too many enemies. Critics will say that this is a problem for Trump because Bannon was instrumental in pushing forward trade sanctions on China about intellectual property, and that what we have here is the swamp drowning another, and a sign that the administration is in crisis. Okay, that's 1. 2 is the other. Well, they were saying today that Steve Bannon was going to be fired, and it looks like it's going to be some more fake news from the people who specialize in this sort of thing. If we know anything about Donald Trump, it's that he loves his base, and Bannon is a direct line to that. What's more, he respects loyalty, and he leaks aside. He knows that Bannon has been with him from the beginning. So you'll hear a lot about this from time to time. Bannon will always be on the way out, but a lot of people are saying he's going to be at Trump's right hand on the day of the second inauguration. Yet use whichever one.
And I think your opinion was very reassuring / problematic.
Thank you. Yes. So, and edit what John just said there as well. Okay. Well, also by the time this hits, maybe people will be listening to this on a Monday or Tuesday. After all, this is evergreen in so many ways. The eclipse is nigh. Maybe the eclipse, when you're hearing this, has passed. I'm not particularly planning to do anything for it. John, are you having celebrations in your house?
No celebration. We aren't mentioning it all because I'm going to use it as a parenting tool. Basically, what I'll do is tell my children that if they don't clean their rooms right this minute, I'm going to blot out the sun. And
yes.
It's a good motivator to give them a good fear of their parents.
Yeah, the guy who could predict those things back in the old days really did have some power. I mean, when he predicted an eclipse and it happened, that night was party central. He was turning them down left and right because he was a mage of some great impact. What I find funny is the old stories that it's a dragon eating the sun. Let's think about this. That's what some said. So they would go outside and bang the pots and the pans in order to drive the dragon away, right? Well, if the dragon is eating the sun, then when the eclipse goes the other way, it's not that the dragon stopped eating the sun. The dragon ate the sun. It means that the sun has passed through the intestinal system of the dragon.
A messy business.
Exactly so. And I don't think anybody who believed that would go outside until it had rained a lot.
At least they didn't have Purell back then. That would have come in handy.
That's right. Right. If you were to redo a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, which I believe hinges on the naming of an eclipse, that's why I always carry Purell with me, because if I'm whisked back in time, I can amaze everyone at the court with this magic fluid that keeps you from getting E. coli or norovirus or a cold. Trust me on this. Trust me. And then I wash their hands. And then a week later they say, I have no abscesses. Truly, this man is a magician of some sort. So we're heading out now. John, anything you want to add about this exhausting week before we conclude the Sprightly podcast?
Well, I just say relax, de-stress from the week. I'm sure that next week will be very calm and measured. That's the prediction that I'm making. So there'll be nothing more to worry about next week. So just have an adult beverage, relax, some Bulliet bourbon perhaps, and my choice is Basil Hayden's, and enjoy yourself. In the rest of the country, we are not so obsessed by what's going on in the Beltway. We have lives to lead.
But that can't be so. I'm on Twitter all the time, and that's all that commands the attention of the world. No, you're quite right. Next week, who knows? Because Monday or Tuesday, my editor came to me and said, we're thinking about doing a story about fallout shelters. And I sort of groaned. Like, no, we're not going to have a war. It's not going to happen. But it was a story about going and finding the remains of fallout shelters around downtown Minneapolis, because there are still some places that have old, ancient, battered, yellow, and black rusty signs.
Right.
The crackers have long gone rancid and were disposed of. The water was poured out. There's nothing much down there, probably but a box of toilet paper. But they were still there for many years, reminding people that, I mean, the 60s had that horrible imminent fear where you had to go and take shelter because fallout is something we stopped thinking. When I was growing up, we didn't worry about fallout. We just worried about everything getting blown up. But they worried about fallout and stuff falling from the sky and having to wait inside and, shoot your neighbors when they bang on the door and all that stuff. So on Monday or Tuesday, there was talk about we should do a story about fallout shelters because everybody's thinking about, oh, my God, duck and cover, nuclear war again. And then by Thursday, nothing. So we live in such an exhausting cycle where Monday and Tuesday, it's nuclear war fears are back day. And Thursday, it's pulling down statues day in the course of a Fargan week. So you're right, John. I think next week is probably going to be nothing at all because everything's going to just be so. How can you top this week? How can you top it?
We will top it. That's
yes,
for sure.
And we will. And we'll be back here to tell you about how it was topped and how some people regard the topping. And I should also tell you that Bombfell, the Great Courses, and Away Travel are some of the many fine businesses that keep us going. Support them for supporting us, please. And don't forget the Ricochet store. Do you need a USB drive, a thumb drive? Because it's impossible to download DNC files onto a thumb drive at the speed at which they were, which suggests maybe that it was a leak. However, if you want to give it a try and see what your data exchange rate is, get one of those Ricochet branded thumb drives or a shirt or a mug, who cares? But do go over to iTunes and leave a review because that helps surface the podcast and introduces it to more people. And remember, you there listening for years, for 365 of these things, and never once saying to yourself, gosh, oughtn't I throw them $1 or $2? Now you can throw us $1 or $2, $2.50. It's the new podcast tier listener. You can read, you can comment. It's cheap, and it's the right thing to do. Thank you, John. Thank you, Peter, who is now sitting in the corner, silent for reasons. Oh, I know what it is. Oh, that's fascinating. Peter has assumed the posture, not of a Confederate soldier, but just sort of a man of vision. And he's painted himself chalk white so that he seems like he's made of marble. And the fabric details of the sweater tied around the neck is an exquisite example of almost Bernini-like sculpturability. So that's why Peter hasn't said anything. He's turned himself into a statue over the course of this last week, and who can really blame him? What do statues do but just sit there and have the droppings from on high placed on their head? See you in the comments, everybody, at Ricochet 3.0. Thank you, John. Thank you, Peter. You can wink, Peter. Okay, well, he's just still a statue. It's been fun. See you later.
See ya.